welcome to the CDAO Magazine interview series. I am Sue Pittacora with Wavicle Data Solutions, and I'm delighted to be joined here today by Himanshu Arora, Chief Data and Analytics Officer of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. Welcome, Himanshu.
Thank you. So good to be here. Good to see you.
That's right. So we all know we need clean data. We need strategy for how we're going to use data and AI and advanced analytics. How are you thinking about your data strategy as it relates specifically to those use cases?
It's the difference between the approach for data strategy for, let's say, AI category of solutions than the traditional, even advanced analytics data science solutions that I think there's sort of a step change. I think in terms of sort of when we look at data science, advanced analytics, which is primarily even, let's say, machine learning driven, the focus has been on getting to clean data, getting to data which is cohesive and can be collated together, and doing, for example, large observation versus small observation, synthetic data, data enrichment, internal and external sources, right? So that has been a lot of focus, and rightly so, because in the models that, let's say, are the algorithms that are built out today, there is the opportunity to then take those outputs and apply a different lens, let's say a lens of bias, which is becoming increasingly pronounced, the need for which is becoming increasingly pronounced. And so you have a stepped opportunity there. With AI, and particularly with generative solutions, one of the things that we're needing to do differently is, instead of looking to debias the model outputs, it is about debiasing the data inputs to the model, knowing that at some stage these models are going to be running more independently. It's not imminent, but it is coming down the line. We all understand that. These models are going to be running more independently than, let's say, the traditional advanced analytics solutions of today do, right? They're also in line, but there's multiple steps, interventions built in there in the automation that is coming our way on top of generative AI, for example. That aspect becomes even more critical. Okay, so then the question becomes, well, how do you do that, right? How do you look to debias your data? That's tough, right? And that's where, quite frankly, we there's a lot of manual work involved there, and we are looking for more and more automated solutions to do that. And it's becoming a bit more of a challenge also, because in order for a AI-driven system to really be, from, let's say, an external customer member facing perspective, it has to encapsulate not just the context in which the question is being asked for, but in the context in which the individual who's asking the question or seeking something, they themselves are, which translates forward to having a much fuller understanding of an individual, which then translates forward to having much more data about an individual than only their healthcare data. So now you're looking to debias not just the inherent observations or data that comes through, let's say, for example, on a claim or on an enrollment, but other data that members are providing to us. They expect us to know about them and how, for example, preferences, right? So preferences in terms of how members wish to engage with us. Are they okay with us calling them? Do they prefer to engage primarily digitally? What times of the day, right? And again, that has a direct correlation to what a member's socioeconomic status might be, right? Or at least an imputed correlation to whether a member is available at certain points in time. When it comes to care and care management, what sites of care, in person or virtual, should a member have the option to go to? And so then that starts to speak to benefit design. So the complexity isn't so much new, it's still there, but isn't so much new in the traditional data that we have. It is now adding all aspects of data around a member and debiasing the input into the model itself. Because if we don't do that, then debiasing the output would take away from what we are trying to do with these AI solutions in the first place, right? So you have to do it on the way in. That's the biggest different, or what's different about the challenge that we're solving for now.
Right, that's intriguing. I think this idea of debiasing the data as it comes in is a really intriguing concept. And I think has a lot more complexity than a traditional data strategy, as you just explained. So a lot of work ahead of us. So as we think about all that, then how do you think about ensuring that your data strategy for AI and advanced analytics really meets the needs of everyone in your organization, all the different use cases, potentially different business units? And then even how does culture play a role in how we're going to adapt the use of these new tools and techniques? How do you think about all that, Himanshu?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think this is, and again, I'm going to start with the generative components of AI. Just given the mass adoption that, if you remember, a year ago, ChatGPT got out of the gate, right? Getting to 100 billion users faster than any other technology had at the time. It has meant that more of our employees, more of our customers, more of our members have had some form of exposure to this capability than previous capabilities, even web, even mobile, even Web 2.0, right? So there is more general awareness that these things exist. Now, in one way, that actually makes the internal cultural adoption of this easier, right? Quite frankly, what I've experienced, and this has been very positive, is much more of a thirst and demand from our internal teams to say, hey, when can we start playing with what we hear people talk about in social media, in people's lives, right? What we experience through other channels, what people experience in other industries even, right? So it's been great from that perspective. I think there's also, from a cultural perspective, this sense of, okay, this is the first time we are veering at the forefront of now encapsulating knowledge work into some level of automation. What does that mean from a individual's knowledge path perspective? Do I have to learn differently, right? Do I therefore have to do my tasks differently? One of the things that we are over time really aiming for is the takeaway, or be able to take much more of the repeat manual tasks of today, which consume a lot of time and energy on part of our frontline associates, and the benefit inquiry is a good example of this. Still give the member the information that they're looking for, complete in a context, so that there's no compromise there. But then for our associates to be able to spend quality time really hand-holding a member who's in a challenging or a difficult circumstance, all the way soup to nuts, right? So it's activating a different part of our learning. It needs to activate a different part of our how we learn the new skill sets in our jobs and roles. So I think that's another part of the culture impact, which is still early, but I expect or anticipate that will play out over time. And I think the sort of the last piece of this is, in terms of when we take a step back and say, okay, how does this work with our mission as an entity, as a company? I think our mission is to show up for everyone as if they are the only one, right? So that aspect of personalization is actually quite exciting and enticing, both internally and externally. So it does help propel the culture in that direction naturally, right? So there's a lot of natural tailwinds behind this. What we got to figure out relatively quickly is enabling the how, so that our internal teams can get to it. We can start to feel more confident in exposing these capabilities externally. And we have the proof points to then be able to say, yes, things are meaningfully better, not just where we applied the AI, but where we do not want to apply the AI, for it to be a much more human experience.
So, Himanshu, let's go back to something you touched on earlier, and you actually just were talking about it again to some degree, is this whole idea of data security and privatization, and knowing that on the minds of every organization, but of course, even more so for a healthcare organization. Anything else you want to add in terms of how you're thinking about that as you move forward?
Yeah, see, data security, and I'm using that term more liberally than sort of just the traditional definition of data security, is an increasingly big concern, because if we go back and what we talked about earlier in terms of there is an increasing reliance on data flowing through different entities and systems and flowing through pipes, which can then make it susceptible to breach, to attacks, to different um, bad actors with bad intentions. I think that's the piece where we are figuring out the balance between how much data versus what value we can get out of that data. And I think that's another space which is ripe for us to apply AI capabilities to. There's already application in the waterfront's well covered in terms of threat detection, right, and applying capabilities that way. But how do you do that, or how do you apply those capabilities to either be that, so preemptively keeping data from leaving the organization when you identify concerns around it, and in the recovery, right? So oftentimes, like, and this has been true for us as well, we've sent data to an entity that has ended up in a breach of some sort, right? So how can we use AI to now accelerate recovery from it? The risk assessment of what the breach was about, who are the members affected, how do we reach out to them, working with the affected entity to start to mitigate the impact of what's happened. Uh, and I think another sort of complexity of this is there is the security aspect of when something negative is happening with data through an explicit action. But much more hidden behind the scenes can be, if we are not careful about it, is how is data being misused, either intentionally or even unintentionally, in these data-driven AI models, algorithms, etc., that we're talking about, right? So we are being very prescriptive in how, where, when, for what context, for what use our data can be used, not just within, but when we send the data out as well. What are the stipulations within which it has to remain, and it has to be governed? And now you need audit capabilities on top of that. Well, that can be extremely labor intensive. How do you automate that, right? So security used to be about what's within my confines and how do I protect my castle. It's much more than that now, and it's creating new opportunities, new challenges.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't thought of it like that. I'm not sure. I think broadening that spectrum of what we're looking at and the way we're thinking about it, and using AI in recovery potentially when necessary. I think that's really brilliant. That's great. So going back to, we talked about data strategy as it relates to AI, advanced analytics, and how that's different from traditional data strategy. But we also talk about, I mean, we still have the core issues of data quality and data accuracy, right? So we've talked about debiasing your internal data. That's one thing, but actually cleanliness, accuracy. Anything you want to add there about kind of how you're thinking about that and what needs to be done in that realm?
Yeah, and this is a very live conversation for us internally, and working with some key partners on this front today, even is, we talked about how different entities are collaborating together even more in the interest of delivering, for example, in healthcare, the highest health outcome, right? For the lowest unit cost, best experience, do it in an equitable way. Well, what that means is not just different categories of data are now coming together more so, right? So clinical data, which is captured in a clinical setting, is now being combined with claims data, is being combined with pharmaceutical data, with lab data. Each of these data sets come with their own data quality issues and challenges to begin with. No data set is 100% devoid of data quality challenges, in spite of all remediations. It's sometimes a whack-a-mole, right? Like you gotta keep investing in making data quality better. So the intersections of how these different data sets come together, that's an area where the focus of data quality is shifting beyond, hey, how do I keep my claims, enrollment, member service data at its highest quality, to how do I now take what I have, combine it with these other data sets that are coming in, right? Or at some other point of synthesis, and make data quality work across. A specific example of this is, it's good to have good claims information about a member, but for us to really understand them from a 360-degree perspective, be able to, let's say, define, design, implement very targeted care management programs around them, be able to assist them before health risks present, we need clinical data, right? But even combining clinical data, even combining belly buttons, right? So a patient for a provider and a member for us, making sure that it's the same member, that involves some complexity. Then you start to overlay, okay, this claim with what episodes of care does it encapsulate? And how do I correlate this prescription that was prescribed here with a claim that I see here on the medical side, with a pharmacy claim that I see here? These lab observations, where do I park them on a timeline to be able to develop a comprehensive picture about the member? So the data quality concerns are moving out of the databases, if you will, into real world processes that people are experiencing. And therefore, data quality can no longer just be a discipline for the backend. It is a discipline that has to be applied in line with the process running, right? So it's not that we need less data quality. That's always going to be an issue or a concern. Whether it's missing observations, mistyped information that got dropped during transition from one entity to another, missing values, etc. All of those concerns, none of them are magically going to go away. But we can't just handle them alone in the database level. We have to elevate that and handle at the process level as well.
Right. Well, Himanshu, thank you so much. You shared so many insights today, from thinking about game-changing AI innovations, looking at an internal framework, debiasing the data, using AI for recovery and data breaches potentially. Really a lot of rich insights. Thank you so much for your time today. Greatly appreciate it. And to all, please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. Thank you.
Thank you.